This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Regional interests play out as Somalia's Jubaland goes to the polls today. Sudan's Prime Minister promises to fix economy as he takes office to lead country towards democratic elections. And the African continent marks big milestone after 3 years without wild polio virus. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, Mozambique makes steady progress towards restoring relations with the IMF. And in sports, Tunisia Football Federation ends contract with French coach Alain Giresse. Ahmed Mohamed Islam, famously known as Madobe, has secured re-election as leader of Somalia's semi-autonomous Jubaland region after a poll in the capital Kismayo on Thursday morning. Ahmed Mohamed Islam Madobe pulled 56 out of 74 votes, while his contender Anab Mohamed Darir got 17 votes. It was a first-round win for the incumbent since he got more than 2/3 of the vote. He has since been sworn into office despite the Somalia federal government saying it was not going to recognise the outcome. That's according to reports. 4 candidates had expressed their interest to lead the Jubaland federal state of Somalia in the next 4 years. The incumbent, Ahmed Islam, was competing against Anab Dahir, Mohamed Gedi and Mohamed Omar. Well, CGTN's Abdulaziz Billo joins us now from Mogadishu, and in the studio with me is Dr. Hassan Hananji, the director of the Horn Institute. So let's start with you, Abdulaziz. Why is there so much interest in this election in Jubaland, and what's the significance of this for the state of the Somali government?
Well, Karen, based on recent events that have been happening here in the country, there was so much tension between the central government in Mogadishu and Jubaland administration that is based in the port city of Kismayo. Now, the Somali government here in Mogadishu was adamant from the beginning that it was not going rather to recognize the outcome of the elections based on many aspects that it put out in different press statements or time and time again. Now, today in Kismayo, parallel elections took place there. There were 2 different elections in 2 different venues. One is where the current incumbent president, Ahmed Mohamed Islam, famously known as Ahmed Madobe, was elected after garnering 56 out of 74 votes in a parallel election that took place in a secluded house in Kismayo. Also, we saw the winner being declared Abdulrashid Mohamed Hidik, who is a member of the federal parliament here in Somalia. So these 2 leaders now are based in the port city of Kismayo, and there's so much tension going on right now, and experts are saying that the both sides should restrain rather and not result into violence. Now, that is one thing that is being expected there, and one thing that this election also has proved here in the recent months is the tension that exists between neighboring countries to Somalia, that is Kenya and Ethiopia. Ahmed Madobe has been a key ally of Kenya, and the federal government is seen as being one that is backed by Ethiopia, and the fact that the international community and the Somali government failed to stop this election here now sheds more light on the tension between the federal government and its regional member states, and the next days will prove critical in the well-being of the federal government and the regional states.
Okay, thank you. We will return to you in a moment, Abdulaziz. Let's now turn to you. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Hassan. So we do have a result. Madobe has won. As we were hearing there's a possibility of tensions. What is your take on this?
I think one thing that is fundamentally important here is to recognize the margin with which he won the election. I think there were doubts whether he was actually going to win this election in the first place. There were candidates who apparently were being sponsored by both the national government and there are allegations that some of them are being sponsored by foreign and neighboring countries.
Well, three of the candidates were Kenyan.
Yes, apparently they say they were Kenyan, but I don't think that is something new. I think they are Somali. Most Somali politicians, just like most people in the Somali diaspora, have dual nationalities, whether it's Kenyan Somali or British Somali or American Somali. But I think one thing that is important here is that I think the victory has been convincing despite reluctance and displeasure, especially from the national government in Mogadishu. And I think going forward, I think a way has to be found for the government in Mogadishu to actually work with Madobe. Outside that, it's going to create a constitutional crisis, in part because the constitution in Somalia allows states such as Jubaland to organize elections independent of the central government.
Okay, thank you. We will return to you in a moment. Let's go back to Abdulaziz in Mogadishu. There have been claims of interference and bias in the run-up to this election, and the Somali government, as you were saying earlier, said it would not recognise the outcome. Is this still the position of the Somali government, and what is the mood on the ground right now?
Well, Karen, just as you've mentioned, the Somali government here, according to the constitution of the Somali government, gives the Ministry of Interior and Federal Affairs oversight authority in conducting regional elections. There are also regional bodies that are also tasked with elections, but they have to work jointly with the Ministry of Interior and Federal Affairs so that the outcome of the results that come in any federal member state, not just Jubaland, but also Galmudug and Southwest, as we've witnessed in the past month, they work jointly with both the federal government and the regional authorities so that the outcome can be one that is popular and that is one that is endorsed by not just the local residents but also by the government as well as the international community that is playing a pivotal role in supporting state building efforts here in Somalia. Now the mood on the ground here is unpredictable right now. Tension is still imminent in the port city of Kismayo. Now the parallel elections that took place there today, the second president that was declared there, Abdirashid Mohamed Idig, enjoys the support of an individual called Abdinasir Serar, who was also a key ally of Madobe before they fell out prior to these elections here. And Serar commands a huge number of forces who are allied also to Ahmed Madobe's military there in the port city of Kismayo. So that tension still remains there. And the federal government here, as well as the international community, have released numerous statements warning that this process from the beginning was a sham, because they're saying that the elders here who were picked to select the MPs were not genuine. Therefore, the MPs who are elected are not genuine. So the election of Ahmed Madobe is one that is being termed as a null and void, and that the Somali government here in Mogadishu will not recognize it. And it has also put into question the tension between Ethiopia, Kenya, and the federal government here of Somalia. And yesterday, the UN top envoy to Somalia, James Swan, in a statement to the UN Security Council, warned that the tension that risks remaining here in Somalia should be avoided, and that dialogue should be the only means to address political differences between Ahmed Madobe and the central government here, as well as the opposition they are based in Kismayo.
Okay, thank you. Turning back to you now, Dr. Hassan. So as we are hearing there, the government, the central government, isn't recognising the result. That's obviously going to create more tension. Although this was a convincing win, evidently, according to the votes. Where does this leave Jubaland? And does Somalia want more control of this state? Is that what's going on here?
Of course, when you are a national government or the central government, you always want to have more control and more say within the federal territories. Now, Somalia is still experimenting with this federal system and with democracy. And how this turns out or pans out is going to determine actually the future of other states within Somalia. And the national government, I don't think it has found a way in which it can actually acknowledge, first of all, the autonomy and the independence of the federal states. And the uneasiness has existed prior to this election, of course, speaks to that kind of existing tensions. Now, you have other players within the region and outside who are actually influencing the direction of the Somali politics. And
this would be Kenya, Ethiopia, and other countries?
Yeah, because Kenya and Ethiopia have invested heavily in places such as Kismayo. Madobe and his Ras Gamboni brigade was critical in assisting in making sure that the rest Kismayo away from Al-Shabaab. And there've been recently credible evidence that Al-Shabaab actually tried to scatter the process. And unless we look at Somalia as a whole and with regard to the specific interests of the region, I think it's going to be challenging for the federal government to try and control the regions on its own, especially when the Constitution clearly guarantees states certain independence when it comes to holding elections within their own jurisdictions.
So the picture you paint there, it sounds rather difficult. Obviously, the next few days are critical. And obviously, you mentioned Kenya and Ethiopia, who are obviously interested in what goes on in this region. Where does it leave us when we're talking about security and stability in the wider region? It
is challenging, in part because efforts by AMISOM and neighboring countries to get rid of Al-Shabaab also depend on the cooperation of Jubaland and, of course, the national government or the federal government in Somalia. And any uneasiness within that region means that there'll be an increased risk, because Al-Shabaab is likely to exploit the kind of fissures and tensions that exist both within Somalia and the region to capitalize on that and actually probably expand and conduct other terrorist attacks within Somalia and across the region. Okay, well, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Dr. Hassan Hanenji, there, Director of the Horn Institute. Thank you very much for coming in and joining us. Thanks for having me. Well, in his first address to the Security Council since taking office, the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Somalia, James Swan, asked the stakeholders in the Jubaland elections to show restraint, refrain from violence and resolve grievances through dialogue. Swan told the Security Council that Somalia has made progress towards recovery, development, reforming the constitution and security sectors in the country. He, however, warned that 2.6 million displaced people in Somalia is a humanitarian crisis. The AMISOM chief, Francisco Madera, called for continued support and training for Somali armed forces.
We must acknowledge the gains made to date toward achieving these priorities. Yet, the window to achieve further necessary progress on these issues is narrowing. Key benchmarks risk falling behind agreed timelines. Further progress may be delayed without renewed dialogue and cooperation among all stakeholders.
Despite the lateness of the hour, it is our hope that the parties will come to an understanding that will produce an inclusive, credible, and peaceful election that strengthens the unity of the people of Jubaland.
Still, with the United Nations, the world body has marked the International Day of Remembrance and Tribute to Victims of Terrorism. The United Nations Office of Counterterrorism launched a photography exhibition to honour terrorism survivors and victims. The photo exhibits will be displayed at the UN headquarters until the end of August. UN Chief Antonio Guterres was speaking at the opening of the exhibition. Here are some of his remarks.
Traumatic memories cannot be erased, but we can help victims and survivors by seeking truth and justice, lifting their voices and upholding their dignity. We must do more to support victims and survivors of terrorism so they can rebuild their lives and heal. And this means partnering with civil society and community organizations that do excellent work in this area. And we must be equally steadfast in our pursuit of solutions and be guided by the voices of victims and survivors in all our efforts. Let this moment be one of reflection, recognition, and action, and let us do everything we can to ensure that the plight of victims of terrorism is no longer a forgotten one.
To Sudan now, where the ushering in of a Prime Minister and the Sovereign Council is expected to help steer the country to growth. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok is expected to form a government of 20 ministers to be selected by the opposition Freedom and Change Alliance on August the 28th.
The swearing-in of Sudan's new Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and other council members is seen as a further step in transition towards civilian rule.
شعار الثورة العميق.
The revolution's deep-rooted slogan, freedom, peace and justice, will form the program of the transitional period. Allow me to accomplish the central demands. The number one priority is to stop the war and build permanent peace. We are working to alleviate the suffering of our people in refugee camps. Stopping the war will also depend on resolving the dire economic crisis and building a national economy based on productivity and not on blessings and donations.
في معسكرات اللجوء.
Hamdok's appointment comes as the outgoing head of the military council, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, was sworn in as a leader of the new sovereign council. The body will run the country for 3 years until an election after decades of autocratic rule. It replaces the transitional military council that took charge after months of deadly street protests brought down the Islamist ruler in April. The new rulers, however, have their in tray full. It includes pushing for the lifting of the country's suspension from the Africa Union and from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. The other daunting challenges that await the rulers include reviving the economy and unifying a country still plagued by unrest in regions. Chomgono, CGTN.
Africa has reached a major milestone in the fight against polio. Since 2016, the World Health Organization has not detected one case of the wild polio virus. CGTN's Asta Tal has more on this major landmark.
According to the World Health Organization, the continent has gone 3 years without the wild polio virus being detected. The body's Africa Regional Certification Commission will now determine if the disease is eradicated in the WHO Africa region.
The significance of this milestone is that it is 5 years since a whole WHO region was certified to have eradicated polio. So it is major.
If eradicated, Africa will join 4 other WHO regions which hold the distinction. The last detected case of wild polio on the continent took place in 2016 in Nigeria. The world body continues to exercise caution, with communities still needing protection from non-wild polio strains.
We absolutely cannot relax having reached this milestone, because we have to consolidate this achievement. This means that the surveillance systems in countries have to be ramped up so that they are absolutely able to detect even the slightest risk of polio re-emerging.
Immunization efforts also need to continue to keep the wild polio strain at bay. Certification that the WHO Africa region is free of wild polio is expected in early 2020. Asta Tal, CGTN.
We're going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including African countries ask Japan to save the elephants by closing its domestic ivory market. And World Health Organization says their current levels of microplastics in drinking water pose no danger to humans.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry says Canada should take full responsibility for the escalating tensions between the two sides. This came in response to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's statement on Wednesday, where he repeated calls for restraint and respect for human rights in Hong Kong.
I would like to point out once again that Hong Kong affairs are purely China's internal affairs. Canada has no qualifications to judge it. We hope that the Canadian side would abide by the basic principles of international law, stop making irresponsible remarks on Hong Kong, and interfere in China's internal affairs.
Meanwhile, the Chinese Foreign Ministry Commissioner's office in Hong Kong has condemned what it calls recent false remarks by unnamed Canadian politicians. It says Canada is confusing violent crimes with peaceful rallies and ignoring efforts by Hong Kong police to punish violence according to the law. It emphasises that Hong Kong is a part of China and says recent remarks from Canada go against Hong Kong residents' shared desire to stop violence and to restore order. Well, Twitter and Facebook have shut down accounts that are allegedly part of an online campaign to discredit Hong Kong's protesters. CGTN's He Weiwei interviewed 2 Facebook users in Hong Kong who claim their accounts have been blocked.
I reached one man by phone call who claims to hold a Hong Kong permanent ID. He says he created a Facebook account on August the 18th but couldn't log in after the second day. And he says this happened before he posted a single word. And he believes it was because he used a profile photo showing his support for the Hong Kong police.
I believe because that photo have a Hong Kong police. I think probably that's the reason. I think most protesters, they hate the police.
He says that's not fair. He thinks the Hong Kong police are professional and restrained, and it's some of the protesters who have been violent. He created this account to express his opinion.
We don't get any money from other organizations, from Chinese government. We don't get any support them. We just do what we believe we should do as a Hong Kong citizens. That's it. However, all our account was gone.
He says he has at least 20 friends in Hong Kong whose Facebook accounts appear to have been suspended for similar reasons.
At this moment, I can't confirm this is one of the accounts that Facebook mistook for fake. But the second person I contacted indicates that maybe this was not an isolated case.
喂，你好。Li Meng, a Chinese national working in Hong Kong, says his 2 Facebook accounts were suspended months ago after he posted comments on what he considered inaccurate reports about the mainland.
报道的好多东西呢特别偏颇，而且他说的都很多东西呢跟实际上并不相符。我就在上面呢跟一些网友的意见可能不太一致吧，然后就再跟他们进行一些辩论。从那开始呢，我就发现我的这个账号呢经常就会出现一些问题，再往后呢就不太能用了。
Both men accuse Facebook of a double standard.
你所谓的言论自由到底是什么呢？自由呢就不能说是只有你自由，然后我不能自由啊。我跟你的观点不一致，那你就要封我的账号吗？
This is a double standard. I think this is ridiculous. We are quite disappointed.
It's unknown how many other cases there are, leaving many big question marks over Facebook standards. He Weiwei, CGTN, Hong Kong.
According to the World Health Organization, microplastics in drinking water pose a low risk to human health at current levels. Its report summarizes the latest research on microplastics in global water supplies. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more.
The small plastic particles detected in tap water and bottled water has sparked public concern across the world. Known as microplastics, the term describes any plastic debris measuring less than 5 millimeters in length. It's accumulating in our ocean ecosystems as well as in rivers and in the soil. But in its first analysis focused on drinking water, the World Health Organization says that at current levels, microplastics do not appear to pose a risk to human health.
The current evidence is not suggesting any cause for concern. However, there are big data gaps. This is a report that looked at drinking water alone. When we look in the future at food and airborne particulates, microplastic particulates, the case may evolve.
As a new field of study, the long-term impact of microplastics is not yet known. But the WHO is calling for a reduction in plastic pollution to benefit the environment and to reduce human exposure.
So there's absolutely no doubt that microplastics are found in drinking water, and indeed fresh water and water sources that lead into the drinking water like groundwater. WHO is recommending that major work be done to better manage plastic pollution. This is the root cause of this whole issue, And you know, it's a complicated one. It has everything to do with better recycling, to better consumer behavior, to better policies. So we need to clean up our environment.
The WHO says that their message is one of reassurance to potentially worried customers, although more research is needed to fully understand the impact of microplastics. For now, the WHO recommends that drinking water suppliers and regulators prioritize on removing the known risks to human health.
Our main concern is absolutely having safe drinking water. We know now in the world that 2 billion people are exposed to water that's contaminated with human feces, and that causes immediate illnesses like cholera and typhoid that kill.
By addressing the problem of human exposure to fecally contaminated water, communities can actually address the concerns relating to microplastics at the same time. Proper treatment can actually remove more than 90% of microplastics from wastewater. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Dozens of African countries have called on Japan to save the elephant by closing its domestic ivory market ahead of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics. The African Elephant Coalition says this will help block millions of tourists from accessing or buying ivory freely. It believes that Japan's domestic ivory markets help to fuel the illegal ivory trade, which indirectly fuels poaching and illegal killing of African elephants across the continent. It urges Japan to follow the examples of China, France, Luxembourg, Singapore and others, which closed their ivory markets. Well, according to the coalition, at least 55 elephants are killed across the African continent every single day. This could wipe out the entire species within our lifetime. The consortium of 32 member countries was gathering during the 18th meeting of the Conference of the Parties of the World Wildlife Convention on Trade in Endangered Species in Geneva. Conservation NGOs and various African countries are calling on the international community to prevent the silent extinction of the African giraffe. CGTN's Brian Toussaint now reports.
Giraffe population is said to have decreased by 36 to 40% over the past 30 years. Conservationists say 9 subspecies are especially at risk of extinction.
It is a silent extinction. They are slowly disappearing from the planet, and they are not getting as much attention from the public as they should, given the small numbers. Because there are, again, less than 100,000, but there's only close to 70,000 breeding animals in all of Africa. That's not much.
6 African countries have proposed to include the species in the Appendix 2 of the CITES Convention. Here, countries have to determine the status of the species in their territories and provide global trade data.
The listing on Appendix 2 does not forbid trade, but it regulates it. You have stable populations of giraffe, then you can commercialize them. But what we want to prevent is for our subspecies, which are endangered, to end up caught up in this trade, and that is exactly what we came to ask for here, and thank God we have the support of a great number of countries.
The decrease in population of the African giraffe stems from a number of things, including the encroachment by humans into the animal's natural habitats. Ecological changes, civil unrest, and local conflicts further complicate conservation efforts. Illegal hunting is also another major threat.
If somebody illegally kills an endangered species of giraffe, and those parts get taken, somehow shipped across boundaries to a country where you can legally export the killed giraffes, and they're all mixed up. You don't know where they came from. And so that's the current situation. With Appendix 2 on CITES, that could no longer exist because every giraffe that would be exported has to have a pedigree. You have to say, this giraffe came from this country.
Opponents of the proposal argue that there is not enough evidence to identify trade as the main factor that is putting the animals at risk. Further discussions on this continue in the ongoing meeting. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
The United Nations Population Fund is organising the second edition of the Youth Forum in the Arab region in Tunis. The forum is themed Knowledge at the Service of Youth in the Arab States. Adnan Shoashi has that report.
The regional event is bringing together youth representatives, influencers and partners, including youth civil society organizations, academic and research institutions, private sector, religious leaders, the UN and other development partners and donors.
We want to focus on the positive side and what Arab youths can achieve instead of stopping at challenges and difficulties. We are aware of the difficult situation in the region and that Arab youths are drowning at the sea to flee unemployment, but there are many success stories.
Several success stories were presented during the three-day forum. Organizers highlighted the role of Arab youths in finding solutions to their own problems, while setting achievable goals in education, research, migration, security, economy, sport and other fields.
We've created an online platform to connect Arab youths. We cannot improve the living conditions and boost the economy in the region without sharing our thoughts and findings.
The presence of the Palestinian delegation here in Tunis shows that Palestinian youths who are often ignored and unable to travel can contribute with ideas, projects to improve the situation of Arab youths.
250 young people from 20 Arab countries are participating in workshops to discuss their ideas based on their knowledge before presenting 4 regional projects at high-level ministerial dialogue session.
Transforming the region and the world through the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, including its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, is one of the most important themes of this high-level regional meeting.
Freedom of expression is guaranteed at the forum. It's a space for dialogue and a platform for the voiceless youths to make their voices heard by decision makers and Arab governments.
The United Nations Population Fund places a special emphasis on young people as decision makers who are committed to significant and concrete choices that affect them as well as their peers, communities and countries.
Tunisian and foreign participants say the forum, designed to constitute a youth space in the Arab region, is intended to open horizon for dialogue, debate, tracking, development and implementation of a dynamic youth agenda in the region. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
All the business news coming up for you after the break, including Mozambique makes steady progress towards restoring relations with the IMF. And Egypt's central bank poised to cut interest rates for the first time in years.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In In Mozambique, the country's president, Filipe Nyusi, says talks with the International Monetary Fund are making encouraging progress. The IMF has been in talks with the cash-strapped country to restore its access to international financing. Mozambique has been battling to recover from a debt crisis after admitting to $1.4 billion of previously undisclosed lending in 2016. Prompting the IMF to cut off support. Nyusi said in July, after the ruling, that Mozambique was committed to respecting international law on debt. In June, Mozambique's finance ministry said the country had reached a restructuring deal in principle with holders of its defaulted 2023 bond. Well, the IMF welcomed that agreement, but said the heavily indebted country needed a wider-ranging plan to ensure long-term debt sustainability. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Egypt meets on Thursday in Cairo to decide on interest rates for the next period. Yasser Hakim looks at the possible outcomes.
The central bank has fixed interest rates at over 15% for the past 4 sessions to encourage foreign investments in its high-yield bonds. Egyptians have also benefited by issuing certificates with attractive returns to sustain the inflationary effects of economic reforms. But many experts believe this will change in the upcoming session.
These circumstances are feasible for easing in rates, especially after the U.S. have reduced its interest rates, in addition to the fall in inflation numbers in Egypt. The improving forex and stability in international oil prices could also encourage the bank to move rates down.
Cutting rates this week could encourage businesses to begin borrowing for production and investment purposes. Industries have been unable to expand because of the high interests on loans. However, there are experts who believe that it's a bit too early to reduce interest rates. The central bank should wait until it can ride out the effects of the latest energy price hikes. The July scrap of electricity and fuel subsidies, as well as the volatility in emerging markets, might be a cause for caution.
Rates could remain as it is because its monetary policy, the bank is seeking to balance between the inflation rate and sustainable development. It also wants to benefit from the improving growth rates in foreign exchange market. Keeping things stable for a couple of months more looks like the safest option.
Experts are divided over the fate of interest rates this week. However, there seems to be a consensus that the CBE should drop rates by next session in September. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The US Federal Reserve says it will remain flexible and interest rates will not be on a pre-set course. Those decisions were made during the American Central Bank's policy meeting late in July. The Fed cut the benchmark interest rate last month for the first time in more than a decade. Central bankers said they would keep their options open for the next move amid fears that trade tensions could slow the US economy. Fed officials expect US growth to slow in the second half of the year, but they also said that they expect a sustained expansion of economic activity, a strong labour market, and inflation near to their 2% projection. Shifting now to Brexit, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's first overseas trip has got off to a flying start. Johnson, who was in Berlin on the first leg of his European tour, received a boost from German Chancellor, who suggested it was possible to get a new Irish border solution in the next 30 days. From the German capital, here's CGTN's Guy Henderson.
Received as a statesman and seemingly rather flattered by it.
Thank you so much for that amazing welcome that I've just had. I don't think I've had one like it in my life. And
then an unexpected offer for visiting UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Find an alternative to the issue that divides us most, said German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and do it very fast.
The Irish backstop has always been a fallback position. If one is able to solve this conundrum, if we find the solution. We said we will probably find it in the next 2 years, but we can also maybe find it in the next 30 days.
Boris Johnson accepted the challenge.
And now is the moment, you rightly say, the onus is on us to produce those solutions, those ideas, to show how we can address the issue of the Northern Irish border. And that is what we want to do.
It is not a breakthrough yet.
Because Berlin's view is still no more negotiations for now, which means any new ideas would only properly be considered in the next round of talks on the future relationship between the EU and the UK after the withdrawal. And what would EU leaders want in the meantime? The very backstop Mr. Johnson says he'll never accept.
If alternatives do come, though, the next question is, will European leaders see them as workable, particularly on this timeline? There is still a suspicion that Johnson's strategy is designed to fail.
He knew already actually that there will be no leverage for renegotiating the deal, but he needs to present his domestic base at home that he tried everything and then blame the EU for not being more flexible.
Johnson leaves with more than he might have expected from his first stop. Next it's Paris, then Brussels later in the week. They've not always been so accommodating. Guy Henderson, CGTN, Berlin.
The ongoing trade friction between economic powerhouses, China and the United States, has drawn the attention of South Africa's media circle. Experts in the country believe that America's plans to impose a 10% tariff on some $300 billion Chinese imports will lead to a global crisis. Well, according to Iqbal Survey, the executive chairman of South Africa's independent media group, the trade dispute between the world's top two economies will not only affect relations between the two sides. Survey says the ongoing friction will ultimately affect the integration and the flow of international financial systems.
I think it's bad when you disregard global rules. I think when you do that, you create a situation of chaos. And it can take you a short while to withdraw, but the consequences of withdrawal could be there for many, many, many years to come. And to get the US to be integrated back into the system again will have long-term consequences for global trade. My view is that President Trump has gone against the tenets of global free trade by imposing these tariffs on China unilaterally. And anything that goes against the rules of free trade and the rules in the way the trade operates and the markets operate in the world is only going to send us backwards. And so I think he has not thought through what he's doing. It has a huge impact, not just on the bilateral relationships between China and the US. It has a global impact because the trade that happens between those countries also affects other countries.
Nomadic livestock herders in East Africa's drylands have endured climate variability for many years. Without proper forecasting technology, the farmers have remained completely exposed to the vagaries of the weather and resultant heavy losses. Not anymore, though. Two telecommunication engineers have developed an app that can be used with the simplest of phones. CGTN's Terry Wangari now reports from Kenya's northern Marsabit County.
For generations, residents in Marsabit, which is in the north of Kenya's arid region, would study the sky for any sign of rain. Whether it's some wind here or a wisp of a cloud there, these signs helped guide their livestock to water. But such divination is not reliable because of intensifying droughts. Those who relied on traditional methods were all caught flat-footed.
In this part of the country, we heavily rely on livestock for our livelihood. For instance, because of the previous drought, at this time there are no goats and many people are facing starvation. Because there's no livestock, there's not much trading, so people here are idle. This is also why there is an increase in inter-community violence. People are stealing each other's livestock, all because of the drought.
Thanks to technology, nomads in this part of the country can now receive detailed weather reports via text message to plan their migrations. The message service is called My Anga, which means atmosphere in Swahili. This is Maryland Market, where buyers and sellers exchange livestock. As you can see, the market is relatively empty. This is because the My Anga app has given pastoralists information that there are greener pastures in Samburu, which is east of Marsabit County.
Mayanga is a good service. As I speak now, my livestock are in a place where I'm sure there is pasture because of the information I got from the service. I just don't get messages about Laisamis area only. I also receive information on other areas like Karare and Isiolo. As of now, because of the service, I have sent my animals to Kipsing, which is near Isiolo. That's how helpful the message service has been for me.
Even those who hardly reads or hardly reads English or Kiswahili, they can get information in local dialect, local language, because it is actually translated into 4 different languages. That is Rendile, Samburu, Borana, and Gabra. That is, it's easier. It has almost simplified everything for the pastoralist community within the Samis and in the larger Marsabit County.
The message service was developed by Amfratech, which began in 2013. The Kenyan firm was created to develop social solutions to societal problems using technology. It uses advanced weather data from U.S. agricultural intelligence firm Aware to provide subscribers with rain and forage conditions for the week ahead in their locality.
Basically how it works is, as Amfratech, we get this 9x9 weather information from Aware. Of course, using different capability or different channels. We use FTP to collect the data from the database. We use API, application programming interface, to now get the data. So what we do now is to do some aspect of value addition to convert this data into a simple but actionable advisories.
A simple but life-changing resource for a community learning to adapt to increasing weather extremes. Amfratech has also rolled out a more advanced app-based version. They hope to eventually sign up tens of thousands of pastoralists. But rolling out their message service has come with its own challenges.
I think one of the challenges is basically the penetration, because it's a vast area, and this is, first of all, it's drought ravaged, okay? And therefore, the population, you don't really get, a dense population at a specific time.
My Anga is just one of the technologies that protect not just pastoralists, but a sector that contributes more than 12% to Kenya's GDP. The developers hope to roll out the application to the rest of northern Kenya and southern Ethiopia. Terry Wangari, CGTN, Marsabit, Kenya.
We're going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including Egypt begins renovations to restore glory of Cairo's historic 100-year-old Barren Palace.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Built at the start of the 20th century by a Belgian millionaire, Egypt's historic Barren Palace is expected to be open to the public once again before the end of the year. But the restoration process has been marked by controversy. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more.
The Barren Palace in Egypt was built over 100 years ago in Cairo's district of Heliopolis by one of its richest residents. Deciding to retire from his worldly travels, the Belgian aristocrat Edward Ampin actually established the entire district of Heliopolis. The palace is now undergoing extensive renovations to bring the historical landmark back to its 20th century glory.
We have now completed approximately 90% of the renovation. We're finishing up. A few months, God willing, and we will open this palace up. It would hopefully be finished by then.
The palace, which was built in 1911, has an Indian architectural style, which its billionaire backer insisted on decorating with the rarest and most luxurious of statues. But pictures of the renovation circulating on social media have caused an uproar. Users are saying that the color used to paint the palace does not match the original shade of its facade, and that its original beauty has been wasted. One restoration specialist explained that the palace's original documents have been carefully studied prior to the renovation process and that the public criticism stems from rumours.
But of course, the recent uproar that took place on social media is not okay. I tell them this is not acceptable. They have to turn to antiquities specialists in the field like us. We have referred back to documents. The documents are there. We have placed them on display and will exhibit them again soon. We will upload them on the website of the Ministry of Antiquities. They are specific to the Baron Palace.
According to the Minister of Antiquities, the renovations were preceded by thorough studies of the original structure, as well as by meetings that involved both experts and the community.
The civilian community, the government, and the executive committees, all of us, have sat together in meetings which were completely honest and the first of their kind. Why? Because I know how much the Baron Palace means to the residents.
Under the supervision of the Ministry of Antiquities, the renovations draw from a $6 million fund and are expected to be finished in 3 months' time. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
All the sports news coming up for you after the break, including Tunisia Football Federation ends contract with French coach Alain Giresse.